right, good morning. So, I know some of you guys are fresh off breakfast, but I want to talk about dessert. So, I hope you're on board, because back when I was much younger, there was a commercial, and for those of you who are in my range or older, you probably remember this commercial was, what would you do for a Klondike bar? And the commercial was just all these crazy things that people would do so they could just bite into that little crispy piece of chocolate and just as you close your mouth, just greeted with all this ice cream goodness. It was so good. And so all these people would do all the base jumping and mountain whatever, just to get this Klondike bar. And, maybe you haven't played that game, but maybe you played the game with your friends where it was like, what would you do for $1 million? Or what would you do for $1 billion? And you're all talking about, I would do this, I would do that. And then on, the drive home, you're thinking about some of your friends' answers and you're like, some of my friends are really unhinged. Wow, I can't believe they said they would do that. And if on the drive home you did not have that thought, you're the friend that's a little unhinged, and everyone's probably talking about, I'm sorry, but that's just maybe the case. But speaking of unhinged, you guys, last week, oh my goodness. For those of you who haven't been a part of our series, we've been going through the book of Exodus, and last week, we have God and Moses up on Mount Sinai, and they are developing this awesome system for how people can be closer to God and they can have this better relationship. And meanwhile, the Israelites have lost their minds and they give up worshiping an incredible, glorious, awesome God for a statue of a baby cow. But they decided to worship this, and so God and Moses came down. Moses is not happy. He ninja knees the 10 Commandments. He breaks them in half, and he's mad, and there's a lot of death and all this kind of stuff that we just don't have time to recap. But all this happened, and so now at this point, I think there must just be this really big sense of awkwardness in the camp. Of God and the people. They're now kind of separated. They're not on the same page at all. And this is not a good analogy at all, but this is the best I could come up with for us today because, that kind of stuff didn't happen today. But kind of think about it if maybe you were in this romantic relationship with somebody and it ends really explosively, but you work together. And so you still have to see this person every day. And there's just this awkwardness of just, oh man, we're not really on the same page. We don't really care for each other right now, but yet we still have to work together. Do I quit? Do you quit? Who's going to leave? We don't know. And so God comes in and he says, I'll leave. I'll go. I mean, obviously you don't want me here. I'll go. And I think it's kind of maybe, for those of you who have kids or you remember when you were a kid and there's this moment when you're arguing with, maybe it's your 2-year-old, maybe it's your teenager, you're arguing with them, and you get to this moment where you're like, one of us needs to leave this room or there's going to be a felony assault. One of us maybe you need to go, maybe I need to go. We cannot both stay in this room and it end well. And so God's like, fine. You don't want me here. You're going to be all the way you are. That's fine. You can do your thing, you can go, and I will stay right here, and all right, that's cool. And Moses, he does not want this. He decides he wants to fight for the people. He wants God to continue to be with him, and so he goes into this place called the tent of meeting. And so we've got it says, and it came about whenever Moses went out to the tent, all the people would arise and stand, each at the entrance of his tent, and gaze after Moses until he entered the tent. So this is the tent of meeting. This is where God would commune with Moses. And whenever Moses entered the tent, the pillar of cloud would descend and stand at the entrance of the tent, and the Lord would speak with Moses. And so they would have this this conversation. And this was typical where the people would stand at their tent and they would watch as Moses goes into the tent, and they're all probably like, okay, Moses, you gotta got to get us out of this. Maybe you had them when you were having relationship issues and you send your friend to kind of smooth things over. So they're sending Moses, hey, go smooth this out for us. We know we messed up. You need to go smooth this out. And so Moses goes in there, and then we get this glimpse of what relationship was like between Moses and God. And it's just so awesome because it says, then the Lord used to speak to Moses face to face, just as a man speaks with his friend. Man, how awesome is this? That they have this kind of relationship where they're just communing as, face to face. And obviously this is a figurative language here. This is not face to face. The story that we're going through, there's a lot of anthropomorphism, so don't think of it as literal. But they're talking face to face. And then God even continues, and he says these great, awesome things to Moses. I know you very well, and I am pleased with you. Man, to hear that from God, I know you very well, and I am pleased with you. And I want to pause here in the story because I think we need to make a distinction. Something that worries me about Southern culture is we have this confusion. We conflate knowing about God with knowing God. Well, they're like, I know God. I grew up in the South. We all know God. And they confuse it with knowing about God. So here's the difference. This picture, you may know her. This is Taylor Swift. I know about Taylor Swift. I know she's an award-winning musician. I know about Taylor Swift. I know that she's a musician, and she's won awards. And she's a musician who's won many awards. Yeah, so I know about Taylor Swift, but I don't know Taylor Swift. I don't know her. I just know about her. Now, this next picture, this is Tristan. This is my son. And if you're confused, he's the one on the right here. It's not right. But don't tell him I said that. Stays here, you guys. It's a safe place. So this is my son, Tristan. I know Tristan. I don't just know about Tristan. I know Tristan. I know his aspirations. I know his dreams. I know his hopes, his strengths, his weaknesses. I know him because we see each other every single day. We talk every single day. And so there is a big difference between knowing simply about someone and what you read about them on the internet and knowing someone. And I think especially in the South, we just have this belief of, hey, I believe God exists, so therefore I am a Christian, I'm good. But here's the thing. Satan believes that God exists too. And so simply believing in his existence is just not sufficient. It does not mean we know God. We just simply know about God. And so we have to move beyond that. We have to move in the direction that we're going to see Moses move. Because here's what he says to God. He says, if I have truly pleased you, show me your plans so that I may know you and continue to please you. So he's just like, man, give me more. And God, how can I please you? And I think one of the ways that we can find out, if we know God or we know just about God is how often do you say to God, how can I please you? Because when we love someone, we really want to be involved with someone, we want to please them. And this is not in some weird way, but in just a way of like, I love to see you feel joy. And that's what you do for someone that you love. And so when we ask that of God, it is a way of saying, I'm not okay with just knowing about you, but I want to know you and I want to please you. I want to see a smile on your face because of my actions. And this is when what Moses says gets really weird. And I just want to set this up before we talk about what he actually said. I want to set this up. So Moses spent 40 days alone with God. This just happened. 40 days alone with God. And then now they're having this conversation, and God tells Moses, I know you. And then God tells Moses, you have my favor, which was a big deal, and it means grace. You have my grace, you have my favor. And then he accepts the Israelite people. We kind of skipped over that. He accepts the Israelite people because of Moses. So, 40 days of quality time, has God's favor, God knows him, he has the acceptance. And then this is what Moses has the audacity to ask this question. Now, please show me your glory. I mean, we look at our lives and our relationship with God, and we're like, I'm nowhere close to where Moses is at. And Moses is where he is, and that's not good enough. And we're down here, and we're just so satisfied a lot of the time. We're just so satisfied where we are. But Moses is up here, and he's still like, not good enough. Not enough God. And I want to talk a little bit about this word glory and what it means. So in the Hebrew, it's kavod, which means heavy. And there's a few different meanings here, and I think that they all kind of give us glimpse. And so one is kind of, what are the physical representations about you? And so if you think about your office, maybe you have your diploma on there, you have your pictures of your kids on there, and these are all physical representations that tell someone about who you are. And so when we see in the Bible, when this is used in reference to God and these physical representations of him, it's a little bit different. I want to show you that. So in Isaiah, it says, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty. The whole earth is full of his glory," the kavod. So just a little different. You got your diploma. God has the whole earth. Just little, So we look at the physical representation that God has, and then it also talks about like what your reputation is. Your name is also your kavod. And finally, in some ways, and this is what some scholars think Moses was really getting to, was an actual physical representation. Moses is like, I want to see your weight, your physical form. And that's a big ask. And there's this guy who's, as you will see, a lot smarter than me, who put very eruditely, A.W. Criswell. He says, God's glory is essentially the profound, glowing, visible, confluent expression of the attributes of deity, which bears witness to a still more profound and incomprehensible reality of essence. And if that confuses you, it is because God's glory is incomprehensible. We cannot truly put it into words. It is too great. It is our human minds just can't get there. And so God, he answers Moses in his own words, and he says, I will make all my goodness pass before you, and will proclaim before you my name, the Lord. And so this kind of harkens back to this whole idea of kavod, of his goodness is tied in with his glory. And so everything that God does is good. In his mercy, he is good. In his justice, he is good. In his wrath, he is good. It is essential to who he is. And so then we get that reputation side with the name. His name is Yahweh, and it has that weight of kavod, his name, what he has done in the lives of his people. And so Moses is getting all that. But God's got some bad news for him. As God says to him, but you may not look directly at my face, for no one may see me and live. No one can see my face and live. It's like, Moses, I love you, pal, but you can't handle this. You can't handle it. And we can't handle it either. And he said, he's just like, I'm sorry, but this makes sense, right? I mean, you think about, like, could you or I stand before the fullness and the full energy of the sun? No. How much less the full magnitude and energy and fullness of the one who created the sun? Not even close, not even remotely close. And so God's like, man, hey, I love you, but you just can't handle all that I am. And so God is like, I'm gonna give you something though. And so here's what he says to him. The Lord continued, look, stand near me on this rock as my glorious presence passes by. I will hide you in the crevice of the rock and cover you with my hand until I have passed by. So more anthropomorphisms here. Then I will remove my hand and let you see me from behind, but my face will not be seen. Now, you probably noticed in this verse that he said something about the rock, but they're in the tent of meeting. They're not, what rock? And so what God is referring to is Moses has to go back up Mount Sinai. He's got to go back. So this is Mount Sinai. So we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But maybe like you've had this time where like maybe it was getting together with a group of friends. You're like, man, we haven't been together in forever. Hey, let's make this plan, and we're all going to get together, and it's going to be awesome. And so you all plan the date and time, and then that day comes, and you look at your energy meter, and you think about the traffic you're going to have to go to get to this place, and you're kind of like, what was I thinking? Man, I don't know about this anymore now that I know what it's going to take. One thing about the reason that I really wanted to do this particular part in Scripture was that it's got some sentimental value for me. This passage was the first one that I ever preached to a group of people. Like I had preached like just in front of my family, and it resulted in some rather harsh reviews from my younger sister. She was not a fan. And I'm sure that had nothing to do with the fact that a lot of my sermons were based around problems I thought she had. So probably no relationship there. But my first one that I gave to a group of people, I was about 19 years old. And when I was going to this passage, I was just thinking, yeah, let's climb Mount Sinai. Let's put our hands in the crevice and just climb our way up. And let's clear the brush and let's do this and it's awesome. But I'm not 19 anymore. I know looks can be deceiving, but I'm not 19 anymore. And so now when I think about this, I don't have the same kind of feelings. I get a little tired. I'm like, man, that's the thing. And so just to tell you a little bit about Mount Sinai we got Mount Sinai here. It is almost 7,500 feet in elevation climbing this thing. And now, thousands of years later, they have this nice path that you can go up to Mount Sinai, and it's just well worn, and there's signage, and you can get up there in a few hours. It's great. But Moses did not have this. He was maybe have been the first one to ever summit this thing. And remember, Moses is 80 years old at this time. And here's the kicker. Last time God provided the tablets, this time Moses had to bring them himself. So he's got a backpack on with 2 stone tablets, and he's having to mount this mountain. What would you do for a Klondike bar? Or maybe, what would you do for a Kavod Dyke bar? Sorry, I know, super corny. I just had to throw it out there. But for that glory, what would you do for that? And I think so often where we find ourselves is that we are like the people. You got Moses going to the tent of meetings, and then you got the people gazing as he goes into the tent of meetings. And we're just so happy staying on our tent, gazing as Moses goes. And what God is calling us is not to gaze, but to go. And he wants us to actually go and move instead of just sitting there gazing about what other people are doing. And so God's not going to call you to climb a big mountain, but maybe he's calling you to climb past your pride. Maybe he's calling you to, even though you feel tired and you worked all day and the last thing you want to do is open up scripture and read, he's saying you got to fight past that. You got to get past that and have that time with him, just like Moses had that time with him. And so the next day, Moses gears up and he climbs the mountain because he wants that moment with God. And one last thing I didn't tell you about, just to get the scale of 7,500 square feet, is that it's 6 Empire State Buildings stacked on top of each other. So Moses climbs this 6, and no elevator in Mount, it's not like Empire State with the elevator. No elevator. He's climbing the Mount Sinai to get up there. And so he comes to this time with God, and he bows before him. And then he says to God, he says, Lord, if you are pleased with me, please go with us. I know that these are stubborn people, but forgive our evil and our sin. Take us as your people. Moses still wants to fight for these people. And God, man, he knows Moses' heart, but he also knows the people's heart. And he knows our heart. And he knows what we are willing to do to be one with him, to get the job done. Moses is like, lead us into the promised land. And God knows what it takes. He knows what it takes, and he knows what we're willing to give in order to achieve it, or what we're not willing to give. And so Moses asks, and God, in his mercy and in his graciousness, he responds. He says, look, I am making a covenant. In the presence of all your people, I will perform wonders that have never been done in the whole earth or in any nation. All the people you live among will see the Lord's work. For what I am doing with you is awe-inspiring. Man, after all this, after everything the Israelites had done, God's like, I will forgive you, and I will continue to lead you, and I will continue to accept you as my people. Man, God is so great. And so Moses stays up there with God, in community with God for another 40 days, and they are just having this amazing time, once again, coming up with a plan on how God's people can get closer to God. And when he comes down, everyone's giving him these weird looks. He's just bewildered by this. Here's what it says happens. So before he comes down, the Lord passed in front of Moses. He says, I'm the Lord. The Lord is a God who shows mercy, who is kind, who doesn't become angry quickly, who has great love and faithfulness, is kind to thousands of people. The Lord forgives people for evil, for sin, and for turning against him, but he does not forget to punish guilty people. So, this is just part of his goodness, that he is a just God, but also a merciful God. And so Moses is bringing all this in, and then he finally comes down. And then we see when Moses came down Mount Sinai, he wasn't aware that his face had become radiant because he had spoken to the Lord. And this wasn't like somebody had just cracked a glow stick over his head and it was kind of coming down his face. The Hebrew here is like that there were rays emanating from his face because of this time that he had spent with God. And I'm like, man, how amazing is that? Is that God, or Moses sitting in there with God, going over all these things of God's faithfulness, the way he had been able to win battles, free prisoners, and rescue sinners. Been able to do this. And we think about these same things. What would our life be like if we thought about these same things, if we had the same moments with God? And maybe our face would not be radiant with rays coming out of it, but I think that the result would be obvious, one that people can see. But when that happens, I can tell you that when you have this moment with God and you feel his presence and you want to do what he does, there's going to be a reaction from people. And what it is they're going to freak out. They're going to freak out. And this is what happens to Moses. It says, when Aaron and all the people of Israel saw that Moses' face was shining, they were afraid to go near him. And when you become more like God and you act like God, it may freak people out and people may be afraid because forgiveness freaks people out. Because you're not supposed to forgive, you're supposed to get even, right? That's what we're taught. You don't forgive, you get even. Or putting others first, that freaks people out because this is America. We're always first. We win, we dominate. We don't humility, what? What? It freaks people out. So when we act like God, there's going to be a freak out by people that just don't understand what he's doing. And so Moses, he has this decision to make. He can say, I'm just going to kind of it's just going to be me and God, and that's fine. We don't need the people. We don't need anything else. And even sometimes we have this like feeling of, man, I don't want people to freak out. I don't want people to think poorly of me because I have a faith or whatever. But hey, it's just me and God, and that's okay. And I'm not going to worry about anybody else. But Moses couldn't do this. And so it says, but Moses called to them. So Aaron and all the leaders of the people returned to Moses, and he talked with them. After that, all the people of Israel came near him, and he gave them all the commands that the Lord had given him on Mount Sinai. Moses could not stay quiet. He had to tell them about his experience. He had to tell them about how to follow God. And I want to make a distinction here because there is this belief, and I think that there was a time in history when it was true, but that time has passed, that simply by acting right, by living like a Christian, that people will find God and accept Christ. But we just do not live in this day of age. Dr. James Emery White, he wrote a book called Meet Generation Z, Understanding and Reaching the New Post-Christian World. And he says that we just can't rely on just acting right. We have to actually say what we believe. And here's what he says. He says, the heart of secularism is a functional atheism. Rather than rejecting the idea of God, our culture simply ignores him. So God is so far off their radar that you can act like Jesus every day and they're not going to make the connection that they are this way because they know Jesus. We have to bring Jesus into the picture in a loving way, just so that people can see that they need him, can see that the reason you're different is because of who he is. But unfortunately, the people couldn't handle it. They couldn't handle this thing. But what's so awesome is that, because we see this quote and it's intimidating, but remember way back in the beginning of the series where Moses started. And let's see where he started in Exodus 3. It says, then Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. So Moses began this journey with him hiding his face. He can't look at God. To now him saying, God, show me your glory. Show me your glory. I want to get all of it. Show it to me. This is the transformation that God's presence in his life has made. And so even though it can be intimidating for us to talk about who he is to others and share his word and all this stuff, even though that can happen, man, you can get there just like Moses got there. But the people just couldn't. They just couldn't handle it. They just couldn't figure it out. And so Moses had to put a veil over his face to hide the glory. And when we look at this moment is God trying to take one more step to lessen the divide between him and his people. And so if you'll just indulge me as I put 4,000 years of history into a few brief sentences, we see with God's presence, him first coming, him manifesting his presence in nature. We saw with Moses, you had the cloud by day, the fire by night, and then in Exodus you see him in thunder and lightning above Mount Sinai. And so now we have Moses, his face glowing, their leader walking among them with God's radiance. But there's the veil. And so eventually, as time goes on, they build a semi-permanent structure to God, and they have him, and then there is a veil in the tabernacle, and then there's his people. And then eventually, as time goes on again, they build a permanent structure, the temple, and there is where God is, and then there is a veil, and then there is God's people. And then finally, we get to the point where Jesus shows up, and Satan sees this as an opportunity. He sees it as an opportunity to, instead of separating God from his people with a piece of fabric, to separate them with dirt and stone in a grave. To end Jesus once and for all. But God's presence, again, as Jesus lay dying on the cross, manifests itself through nature. And we see the sky become dark. And when Jesus dies, an earthquake ripples throughout the city, coming to the temple, tearing this fabric, this separation, this veil in two. Because God had other plans. He had other plans for his people. And on the third day, Jesus rose. And this is the gospel. This is the gospel. And so, if you want to reach people for God, for his word, it's not enough to act right. It's not enough to know about God. But we have to be so full of him that we are emanating, that he is emanating from us, so that we are just showing his goodness, that it's not about acting right, it's not about knowing about him, but we are emanating from him. That we have this glorious goodness that passes before us, that it cannot be destroyed, that cannot be thwarted, that cannot be ended, but that his goodness passes before us in compassion and gracious, where he is slow to anger and abounding in love. And that is the name of glory, Jesus Christ. Let's pray. God, thank you for your mercy, for your love and your goodness. Help us to shine just like you did. Shine to reach people for you, to know you for who you are. In your name.